It's right here, simple math. Total amount of phosphate, total number of people, and by the way, people peak at 2050 at 9 billion or so. So we have this extraordinary collision coming. And there are a few people looking at this, but not very many. And so what do we do with that? Well, the basic resources traction profile is you go after the nice green stuff on your left, and then it gets harder and harder to find. And you go after smaller stuff, more dilute, more distant, more whatever, but we have technology, it looks great. The thing that's missing from the story is that the amount of energy that's required as you move across that curve is not linear. Is it inconceivable at some point we will have to triage, not through price, but maybe through rationing, saying, what are we going to do with our energy? Dig 2.5-mile holes in the ground, or grow food? That might be a choice we have to make at some point. And I would submit to you that the days of how we used to do industrialization, just digging bigger holes and expecting more and more stuff, those are coming absolutely too close. And costs, costs are a function of energy. So I don't focus on costs as much. If you understand the energy story, you understand costs. It's easier that way. So the basic story, very quickly then, is must grow, this energy system that can't grow, and we have this extraordinary story of depletion sitting down here. And this is a really hard message to tell, because this challenges all kinds of assumptions and beliefs. Extraordinary number of them. And so the question is, if you hold this view, how do you talk to people about this? It seems like this should be a simple thing, because we'd say, well, this is clearly a matter of urgency. It's a matter of national security. It's a matter of legacy. There's all kinds of ways you think you should be able to have an easy conversation, like people, like, yeah, let's talk about that. And yet it's hard, and always has been, and may remain hard. And so there's some really big systems at play here. One is we have a money system that's fundamentally out of alignment with the Earth. We're going to have to come up with a money system that does not require growth, and we will at some point. And there's plenty of them. There's lots that work. We just happen to have one that doesn't work that way. And we're going to have to face up to whether we have a problem, meaning we can elect the right person, apply the right solutions, and weasel out of this, or whether we have a predicament, which means we're going to have to do things fundamentally differently. And when we face up to that, my work then is about how do I help create change? How do I do that? And how do you do that? Because that is fundamentally what you're tasked with. To get to 90% by 2050 is an extraordinary shifting of the status quo. Whatever those happen to be, behaviors, entrenched interests, how things are done, belief systems, all of that. How do you create that change? And this was something that bothered me for a long time, and I'm still working at it. But I learned a couple of important things along the way. I learned that there are really only two ways people change. The first is by pain. The heart attack that convinces you to diet. The extraordinary painful event that convinces you that change is finally necessary. So the people I talk to, psychologists and whatnot, they say, yeah, you just wait for that pain moment on the left over here. And then the other way is by insight. I think everybody in this room, you're here because you had the insight at some point, right? But that's rare. It's very rare. So if these are the two ways people change, and by the way, the psychologists say that any time our brains, our technology is really advanced, but we have this, 100,000-year-old DNA, which really hasn't changed. So we still have this safe software instructions. And it turns out that any loss in our brain is interpreted as a loss it's the same as mortality. That's how our brain wires it up. And so talking to people about things where they have the opportunity to interpret it as a loss, you will automatically be triggering some very uncomfortable emotions. And that's just part of the landscape. So knowing it is really actually quite helpful. I don't actually care about why people change via insight. I get this a lot. People say, why? I need you to focus more on climate change. It's the most important thing. You should focus on that. And I don't. And I don't because of the framing I'm about to give you. Because I have thousands of emails from people who have done things that I consider perfectly in alignment with everything climate change might care about, or any other sort of issues you might care about, including people have changed their jobs, where they live, how insulated their homes are, they're growing food now, they're more energy resilient, smaller carbon footprint, all of that. I'm actually agnostic about how that change came about. So what I am not agnostic about is, am I going down the easy road or the hard road? Easy is my preferred road. This is already hard enough road. Turns out behavioral economics is a growing branch that has a lot to teach us, and I got a lot out of meeting with, interviewing, and then reading a book by a guy named Dan Ariely, who's one of the biggies in the field of behavioral economics. Behavioral economics is awesome because they don't start with any assumptions like people are rational. They start with the assumption we're going to set up situations and figure out what happens, and then we're going to interpret the results and see what it tells us about us. And the title of the book that I'm drawing these lessons from, which is just brilliant, is called Predictably Irrational, which actually describes how humans are. And so it turns out that some of the lessons that came from that book, here's 4. The first is that we are wired, hardwired, for near and immediate threats. We respond very well to them. The saber-toothed tiger is more compelling to us than the glacier that's slowly advancing or retreating. So this is just how we're wired. It means we have a very steep discount rate in their terminology, meaning we really apply more weight to things that are right in front of us. Stuff that's distant, it just gets really steeply discounted to the point of vanishing. The second is humans are much better at concrete, very concrete information versus statistical or otherwise abstract information. So the more concrete the information can be made, the better. That's why I use the stadium example around exponential growth, which is a hard concept to get across, but it makes it both immediate for you and it hopefully makes it a little bit more concrete. And it has to be confirmed by daily experience. So in the United States, there's renewed sort of emphasis and interest in climate change because we just came through the hottest summer on record. When I was over in the UK 3 weeks ago and I was talking with people at the Department of Environment and Climate Change, they're just nowhere. They said we just lost about a decade in terms of interest, political interest, because they just came through their wettest and coldest summer on record. If what you talk about can be confirmed in people's daily experiences, you have a much better chance that it's going to stick, land, and be persistent in some way and work within their frameworks. And then this is critical, a sense of agency. You have to feel like you have control in this storage. So even if let's imagine the United States stops burning all coal and all forms of fossil fuels tomorrow. Who's going to burn it?
China.
China. Right? We all hold that. I hold that too. That's a belief I have. But it means that my personal sense of agency in this story is about as small as it can get. And so on this front, if you're seeking to motivate people, and by the way, all these lessons come from behavioral economics, they're really looking at this from a marketing standpoint, like how do we get people to buy stuff? I mean, that's one of the fundamental sources of revenue that they get to study these sorts of things, but that's ultimately what we're asking people to do anyway, right? We want them to buy an idea, or some information, or a concept, or a new belief system. It's the same process. So there's some lessons to be drawn from this, and having that sense of agency, just critical. Just critical. So another piece of the how comes to me from the work of George Lakoff and other people who do political framing. And this is really important. So one of the things that I was talking with one of his right-hand people, and I was asking about how to, what's really important in messaging. And he said, oh, it's very simple. You have to frame things in moral terms whenever possible. I said, yeah, do you have an example? He said, yeah, when Obama went after healthcare, he made just a huge blunder. What he did was, he said, we want to control healthcare costs. He said, that's not at the moral level, that's tactical. If instead Obama had come out and said, Americans deserve access to high-quality healthcare when they need it, you all figure out the details. Holding that higher ground means that you have an unassailable position. It's harder for your opposition to come out and shoot at it. And so the question becomes, whenever possible, how do you take your message and put it into moral terms? So for me, when people ask me, what do I do? I'm going to give you one sentence. I say, well, I'm creating a world worth inheriting. That's it. You gave me my one sentence. There's a lot under that. How much time do we have? But this is my final distillation of what I'm doing. And so this framing, that's like motherhood and apple pie. What are you going to do? Like somebody's like, oh, well, I totally disagree with that. It's critical, though. That framing is absolutely critical.